Christmas Eve used to mean something in the Harrison family home, but tonight, my father Dan stood in our living room doorway, his face purple with rage, clutching the modest gifts I'd brought for everyone. "Get out of my house before I call the cops," he screamed, hurling my carefully wrapped presents into the snowy driveway. My golden child brother Jake applauded like this was dinner theater. I calmly picked up my winter coat, smiled at the chaos, and said those magic words that would change everything forever. "Gladly, Dad." The red and green wrapping paper scattered across the white driveway like confetti at a funeral. Each gift represented hours of careful thought about what might finally bridge the gap between us. For Mom, I'd chosen a silk scarf in her favorite shade of blue. For Jake's girlfriend, Crystal, bath salts from that expensive boutique downtown. Even for Dad, despite everything, I'd picked out a biography of his baseball hero from the 1970s. None of that mattered now, as the packages lay crumpled in the December snow, slowly absorbing moisture that would ruin whatever was inside. The porch light cast long shadows across the yard, illuminating the destruction of my Christmas peace offering. Neighbors walking their dogs slowed their pace, pretending not to stare at the obvious family drama unfolding in full view. Dad's breathing was heavy, visible in the cold air like the steam from an angry bull. His flannel shirt was wrinkled from another long day at the factory, and his graying beard needed trimming. The same permanent scowl lines around his eyes had deepened over the past few years, etched there by disappointment and resentment that seemed to grow stronger every time he looked at me. "Don't come back," he spat, his voice carrying across the neighborhood. "I'm done pretending you're part of this family." Jake stepped forward from behind Dad, his smug grin spreading wider. At 29, my younger brother still carried himself like the high school football star he'd been a decade ago, though his athletic build had softened considerably. His sandy brown hair was perfectly styled, and he wore the expensive sweater that Mom had probably bought him for tonight's celebration. "Finally," Jake said, clapping his hands together slowly. "Maybe now we can have a normal Christmas, without all this tension." Mom appeared in the doorway behind them, her thin frame wrapped in the holiday apron she'd owned since I was a kid. Linda Harrison looked older than her 55 years, worn down by medical treatments and family stress. Her once bright smile had faded to worried lines around her mouth. She opened her lips as if to speak, then closed them again, choosing silence over confrontation. Crystal emerged next, her blonde hair cascading over one shoulder as she surveyed the scene with calculating eyes. She wrapped her arm around Jake's waist possessively, her red manicured nails drumming against his side. At 26, she carried herself like someone accustomed to getting her way through manipulation and charm. The house behind them glowed with warm yellow light, decorated with the same ornaments we'd used since childhood. The Christmas tree twinkled through the front window, surrounded by carefully wrapped gifts that Jake and Crystal would open in the morning. The whole scene looked like a postcard of domestic bliss, if you ignored the sun being banished to the cold. I pulled on my black wool coat, taking my time with each button while the family watched. The silence stretched between us, filled only by the distant sound of holiday music from another house and the crunch of snow under my feet as I stepped toward my car. "Sam," Mom finally whispered, but Dad shot her a look that silenced her immediately. The irony wasn't lost on me as I walked past the mailbox that still bore the Harrison name. These people had no idea how much their lives had changed over the past 14 months, or who was really responsible for the roof over their heads. They stood there in their comfortable ignorance, secure in their belief that they held all the power in this relationship. I reached my car and turned back one final time, memorizing their faces as they clustered together in the doorway. Tomorrow would bring revelations that would shatter their certainty about everything they thought they knew. For tonight, though, I was content to let them believe they'd won. The engine started smoothly, and I backed out of the driveway carefully, avoiding the scattered gifts that would freeze solid before morning. As I drove away, I could see them still standing there in the golden rectangle of light, probably already planning how they'd explain my absence to relatives who might ask where I was on Christmas Day. None of them noticed the small smile playing at the corners of my mouth, or understood why I wasn't fighting back like I used to during these confrontations. They had no way of knowing that everything was about to change, and that the power they thought they wielded over me was nothing more than an illusion that would crumble in less than 48 hours. Christmas morning arrived with fresh snow and the sound of laughter echoing from the Harrison family kitchen. I knew this because Mrs. Peterson, the 70-year-old neighbor who'd lived next door for 30 years, had called me at 7 in the morning to check on my well-being after witnessing last night's spectacle. "That boy Jake's making quite the celebration over there," she'd said, her voice carrying a mixture of concern and disapproval, carrying on like he won the lottery or something. I thanked her for caring and assured her I was fine, though I didn't mention that I was currently sitting in my downtown apartment, watching the snow fall while drinking coffee that cost more per pound than Dad made in a day. The contrast wasn't lost on me, as I imagined the scene unfolding 3 miles away in the house I'd grown up in. According to Mrs. Peterson's detailed report, Jake had been outside at 6:30, making a show of cleaning up my scattered gifts and tossing them dramatically into the garbage can. He'd paused to wave at her kitchen window, grinning like he'd just solved all the family's problems by getting rid of me. The real celebration, she told me, had started when Crystal came outside in her silk pajamas to help him. Together, they'd made quite the production of it, laughing and talking loudly enough for the whole neighborhood to hear about their exciting news. "We're moving back in permanently," Jake had announced to anyone within earshot. "Dad's giving us Sam's old bedroom, and we're turning it into a nursery. Crystal's expecting, and we figured it was time to start fresh here where family actually supports each other." The words stung more than I wanted to admit. That bedroom held 2 decades of my memories, from childhood fears conquered under those covers to late nights studying for college entrance exams that Dad had dismissed as a waste of time. Now it would house the next generation of Harrison golden children, while I remained permanently exiled. Mrs. Peterson had also overheard Jake bragging about the family's recent good fortune during his outdoor announcement. According to his version of events, they'd nearly lost the house last year due to some temporary financial difficulties, but everything worked out perfectly when distant relatives stepped in to help. "Some anonymous buyer saved us," Jake had declared proudly. "Bought the whole place and lets us stay here as renters for practically nothing. Dad says it was probably Great-Uncle Robert's estate finally getting settled, or maybe Mom's rich cousins from California who never visit. Either way, we're set for life now." The casual way Jake dismissed their near homelessness revealed everything about his character that I'd observed over the years. He'd never worked a steady job longer than 6 months, preferring to drift between get-rich-quick schemes and half-hearted attempts at various careers. His latest venture had been selling overpriced supplements online, which had lasted exactly 3 weeks before he lost interest. Crystal, meanwhile, had encouraged this behavior throughout their 2-year relationship. She seemed to view Jake as her ticket to a comfortable life, without having to work for it herself. Her background in retail management had given her just enough experience to critique everyone else's career choices, while contributing nothing substantial to their shared income. The part that bothered me most about Jake's outdoor announcement wasn't his arrogance or his assumption about our mysterious benefactor. It was his complete lack of gratitude for whoever had saved his family from disaster. In his mind, their rescue was something owed to him rather than an extraordinary act of generosity that deserved acknowledgement. Mrs. Peterson had saved the most interesting detail for last. During Jake's celebration, he'd accidentally revealed the full scope of their financial crisis from the previous year. What he'd described as temporary difficulties had actually been a cascade of disasters that brought them within weeks of losing everything. Dad's gambling debts, which the family had kept hidden, had reached catastrophic levels. His weekly poker games had evolved into online betting that consumed entire paychecks. When that wasn't enough to feed his addiction, he'd started borrowing against the house without Mom's knowledge or consent. Mom's cancer treatments had added another layer of financial devastation. Her insurance had covered the basic medical costs, But the experimental treatments that saved her life came with bills that stretched into the tens of thousands. The family had exhausted their savings, maxed out credit cards, and borrowed against everything they owned. Jake's contribution to this crisis had been characteristically selfish. Instead of getting a job to help during the emergency, he'd actually increased his demands on the family budget. His failed business ventures had required startup capital that came from their dwindling resources, and his expensive tastes had never adjusted to match their reduced circumstances. The convergence of these three financial disasters had created a perfect storm that traditional family resources couldn't weather. The foreclosure notice had arrived on a Tuesday in November, giving them 30 days to either pay the full amount owed or lose their home forever. Jake's casual mention of these details during his victory lap revealed how completely he'd been shielded from the true scope of their near catastrophe. Dad had protected his pride by keeping the worst details secret, while Mom had focused her energy on recovery rather than financial planning. This left Jake free to imagine that their problems had been minor inconveniences rather than life-altering crises. The mysterious buyer's intervention had saved them from homelessness, bankruptcy, and the complete destruction of everything they'd built over 25 years of marriage. The generous rental terms had allowed them to keep their dignity while slowly recovering their financial stability. Yet none of this gratitude was evident in Jake's Christmas morning celebration. Instead, he treated their rescue as validation of his own importance, rather than evidence of someone else's extraordinary kindness. His assumption that wealthy relatives had saved them revealed his sense of entitlement to other people's money without offering anything in return. As I listened to Mrs. Peterson's detailed account of this morning's events, I found myself feeling a mixture of sadness and resolve. My family's complete ignorance of their true circumstances was about to collide with reality in ways they couldn't imagine. Their comfortable assumptions about power and control were built on a foundation that I could remove whenever I chose. The irony was perfect. Jake was celebrating his victory over me while living in the house I owned, planning his future in the bedroom I'd paid to save, and supporting his family with the generosity I'd provided. His triumph was completely dependent on my continued kindness, though he had no way of knowing how precarious his situation really was. Today's celebration would be their last, as a family living in blissful ignorance of their true circumstances. By tomorrow night, everything would change, and Jake's victory lap would be remembered as the final moment when he felt truly secure in his unearned position of power. The journey that led me to become my family's secret savior began 3 years earlier, though they never bothered to learn the details of my life after high school. While Jake was failing his way through community college on Dad's dime, I was working 16-hour days to build something meaningful from nothing. My exodus from the Harrison household had been inevitable since childhood, but it finally happened the summer after graduation when Dad made it clear that supporting my education wasn't worth his investment. "College is for kids who can't work with their hands," he'd declared, assuming I'd follow him into factory labor like every Harrison man before us. Instead, I'd moved into a studio apartment above Murphy's Deli on the east side of town, paying rent with money earned from 3 different part-time jobs. Mornings belonged to the coffee shop on Main Street, afternoons to inventory work at the electronics warehouse, and evenings to computer repair calls that I'd started advertising through flyers posted around the college campus. The computer repair work had been my gateway into understanding technology beyond the basic skills I'd taught myself in high school. Every broken laptop and crashed desktop taught me something new about hardware, software, and the growing dependence that small businesses had on systems they didn't understand. My breakthrough came 18 months later when Martha Chen, who owned the accounting firm downtown, hired me to fix her office computers for the 3rd time in 2 months. Instead of just repairing her machines, I asked why they kept failing and discovered that her entire business was running on outdated software that couldn't handle her client load. "What would it cost to fix this permanently?" she'd asked, gesturing at the chaos of cables and overheating processors that somehow kept her business running. I'd spent the next week developing a proposal that would modernize her entire system while creating automated backups and maintenance protocols. The price tag had been $3,000, more money than I'd ever asked for at once. But Martha had agreed immediately after seeing what her current problems were costing in lost time and frustrated clients. That project led to 2 more business clients, then 5, then 12. Each success taught me more about what small businesses actually needed versus what technology companies were trying to sell them. I discovered a gap in the market for affordable, reliable solutions designed specifically for local businesses with limited technical expertise. Marcus Williams, who owned the construction company across town, became my mentor during this crucial period. At 58, he'd built his business from a single pickup truck into an operation that employed 30 people and handled major commercial projects throughout the region. "You've got something most young people don't understand," Marcus had told me over coffee one morning after I'd solved a complex networking problem for his office. "You listen to what people actually need, instead of trying to impress them with what you think they should want." Marcus introduced me to other business owners who valued practical solutions over flashy presentations. His endorsement opened doors that would have remained closed to a 22-year-old working out of his apartment, and his advice helped me avoid mistakes that could have destroyed my reputation before it was established. The real transformation happened when I developed a software solution that automated inventory management for small retail businesses. Instead of selling it to one client, Marcus suggested I turn it into a product that could serve multiple businesses with similar needs. "Stop thinking like an employee and start thinking like an owner," he'd advised. "Your time is worth more when you can sell the same solution to 20 businesses instead of building custom systems for each one individually." The software launch exceeded every expectation I'd dared to have. Local businesses loved having a system designed specifically for their needs, rather than expensive enterprise software that required extensive training and ongoing support. Word spread through the business community faster than any advertising could have achieved. Within 6 months, I was licensing the software to businesses in 3 counties. Within a year, a regional technology company had noticed my work and wanted to acquire both the software and my services as part of their expansion strategy. The negotiation process taught me more about business than my previous 3 years of struggling had provided. The acquiring company valued not just the software itself, but the relationships I'd built with local businesses and my understanding of their specific needs. They offered me a position as Regional Development Director, along with equity in their company. The acquisition closed on my 28th birthday, providing enough capital to invest in additional projects while maintaining steady income from my new corporate position. For the first time in my adult life, I had financial security that didn't depend on working multiple jobs or stretching every dollar until it screamed. During this entire transformation, I'd maintained minimal contact with my family. They knew I was doing computer stuff but showed no interest in understanding what that actually meant for my life or my future. Dad still occasionally mentioned factory jobs that were hiring, while Jake treated my work as a hobby that would eventually be replaced by real employment. The distance between us had grown not because of anger, but because of fundamental differences in how we viewed success, responsibility, and family relationships. They measured worth through immediate gratification and social status, while I'd learned to value long-term planning and self-sufficiency. Ashley entered my life during this period of growth and change. We'd met at a small business networking event, where she was representing the marketing firm she'd started after leaving her corporate job. Her intelligence, independence, and genuine interest in building something meaningful made her different from anyone I'd dated previously. "Your family doesn't understand what you've accomplished, do they?" she'd observed after hearing me describe my background during one of our early conversations. She was right, but it had taken meeting someone who appreciated my journey to fully recognize how completely my family had dismissed my efforts. Ashley saw the dedication and sacrifice behind my success, while they saw only my absence from their lives and my failure to follow their predetermined path. Our relationship developed slowly and naturally, built on shared values and mutual respect rather than convenience or social expectations. Ashley encouraged my ambitions, while helping me understand that success meant nothing if it came at the cost of personal integrity and emotional well-being. When she suggested that I might want to help my family despite their treatment of me, I'd initially resisted the idea. They made their choice when they decided I wasn't worth their investment, I'd argued. But you'll always wonder what might have been if you don't try, she'd responded. And you'll know for certain whether they can change, when their survival depends on recognizing your worth. That conversation planted the seed that would eventually grow into my decision to save their house anonymously. I wanted to discover whether their treatment of me was rooted in genuine dislike or simply in their assumption that I would always be available to dismiss and ignore. The test would reveal everything about both my family's character and my own capacity for forgiveness. Either they would eventually recognize their error and work to repair our relationship, or they would continue taking my generosity for granted while maintaining their superiority complex. Ashley supported whatever decision I made, but she also helped me understand that my choice needed to serve my own long-term emotional health rather than just my family's immediate financial needs. Don't set yourself on fire to keep them warm, she'd warned, especially if they won't even acknowledge that you're burning. The wisdom of her advice would become clear 14 months later, when I sat in my apartment on Christmas morning, listening to Mrs. Peterson describe Jake's victory celebration while he lived unknowingly in the house I'd purchased to save his family from homelessness. 14 months earlier, Mrs. Peterson's phone call had shattered the peaceful November evening I'd been enjoying with Ashley in my downtown apartment. We'd been planning a quiet weekend getaway when the phone rang at 8:30, and Mrs. Peterson's worried voice immediately told me something was seriously wrong. "Sam, honey, I hate to bother you, but I thought you should know what's happening over at your folks' place," she'd begun, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by genuine concern. "There's been some kind of official notice posted on their front door, and your parents haven't left the house in 3 days." The details she'd observed painted a picture of a family in crisis. Strange cars had been parked in the driveway while men in suits carried clipboards and took photographs of the property. Mom had been spotted crying in the backyard, while Dad had started drinking beer at 10 in the morning and continued throughout the day. "I've lived next to them for 30 years, Mrs. Peterson had continued, "and I've never seen them like this. Whatever's happening, it's bad enough that Jake drove over yesterday, and they had some kind of argument in the front yard before he stormed off. The foreclosure notice, she'd discovered during her morning walk, gave them 30 days to either pay $47,000 in delinquent mortgage payments and fees or lose the house permanently. The amount was staggering enough that traditional family resources clearly couldn't cover it. Ashley had watched my face change as Mrs. Peterson described the situation, reading my emotional conflict without needing explanation. When I'd hung up the phone, she'd simply asked, "What are you going to do?" That question had kept me awake for 3 nights straight while I wrestled with competing impulses. Part of me felt vindicated that their financial arrogance had finally caught up with them. They'd dismissed my success while living beyond their own means. And now reality was demanding payment for years of poor decisions. But another part of me couldn't ignore the fact that Mom's cancer treatments had been a legitimate crisis beyond anyone's control. The experimental procedures that saved her life had come with devastating costs that insurance refused to cover, and no family should face choosing between medical care and keeping their home. Dad's gambling addiction complicated my sympathy considerably. According to Mrs. Peterson's careful observation, his daily routine now included trips to the corner store for lottery tickets and long hours spent on his laptop, presumably feeding his online betting habit. His pride had prevented him from admitting the scope of his problem or seeking help before it destroyed their financial security. Jake's role in the crisis was characteristically selfish. Instead of finding employment to help during the emergency, he'd continued his pattern of failed entrepreneurial ventures that required family investment without producing any return. His latest scheme had involved selling imported vitamins online, which had lasted exactly 2 weeks before he abandoned it for something easier. The convergence of these 3 factors had created a financial disaster that no traditional family resources could solve. Even if they'd swallowed their pride and asked relatives for help, the amount needed exceeded what anyone in their extended family could reasonably provide. My own financial situation had evolved dramatically since leaving their house 6 years earlier. The software acquisition had provided enough capital to invest in additional projects, while my corporate position offered steady income that exceeded my living expenses by a comfortable margin. $47,000 represented a significant but manageable expense that would solve their immediate crisis without endangering my own security. Ashley had helped me think through the implications of any decision I made. If you help them, it needs to be on your terms, she'd advised. Don't put yourself in a position where they can take your generosity for granted or treat you badly while you're supporting them. Her suggestion to handle the purchase through my business attorney had been brilliant. Timothy Rodriguez specialized in real estate transactions and understood how to structure deals that protected my interests while providing the anonymity I wanted to maintain. The research Timothy conducted before the purchase had revealed details about my family's financial situation that were worse than I'd imagined. Dad had actually taken out 3 separate loans against the house without Mom's knowledge or consent. Using forged signatures and fraudulent income documentation that could have resulted in criminal charges if the bank had chosen to prosecute. Your father has been gambling with money he didn't have for at least 2 years, Timothy had informed me during our initial consultation. The foreclosure is actually the least of his problems if anyone decides to investigate how he obtained these loans in the first place. Mom's medical debt had added another layer of complexity to their crisis. The bills from her experimental treatments totaled over $60,000, though most of this had been structured as payment plans that were manageable until Dad's gambling destroyed their regular income flow. Jake's financial contributions to the family crisis had been entirely negative. His failed business ventures had required startup capital from family resources, while his expensive lifestyle had continued regardless of their reduced circumstances. He'd actually borrowed money from Mom's emergency fund to invest in cryptocurrency, then lost the entire amount when the market crashed. The total scope of their financial obligations was staggering. Beyond the immediate foreclosure amount, they owed additional money to credit card companies, medical providers, and various creditors who had been patient during Mom's illness, but were now demanding payment as her health improved. Timothy's solution had been elegant in its simplicity. Instead of just paying their delinquent mortgage amount, we would purchase the entire property through my limited liability company and lease it back to them at terms that covered the ongoing expenses while providing manageable payments they could afford long-term. The purchase price of $450,000 reflected the property's actual market value rather than just their outstanding debt. This gave me significant equity in the investment while allowing them to remain in their family home without the shame of accepting obvious charity. The rental agreement we structured was incredibly generous by any standard. Their monthly payment was set at $800, which barely covered property taxes and maintenance expenses while providing no profit for my investment. Additionally, the lease included provisions for property improvements and gave them security against arbitrary rent increases. "Are you sure about this?" Timothy had asked when reviewing the final terms. "You're essentially giving them a house worth nearly $500,000 in exchange for payments that don't even cover your carrying costs." I'd assured him that my decision was based on factors beyond simple financial return. This arrangement would test whether my family could recognize generosity when they received it, and whether their treatment of me had been based on perceived power dynamics rather than genuine dislike. The closing had been handled entirely through intermediaries, with the bank processing the sale without my family ever learning the buyer's identity. From their perspective, they'd been saved by an anonymous benefactor who wanted nothing more than reasonable rent payments in exchange for keeping their home. Ashley had supported my decision while helping me understand that the real test would come later. "You've given them a chance to prove whether they can appreciate what they've received," she'd observed. "How they treat you going forward will tell you everything about their character." The months following the purchase had been revealing in ways I hadn't anticipated. Instead of becoming more grateful or introspective about their near disaster, My family had simply adjusted to their new reality without acknowledging how close they'd come to losing everything. Dad had continued his gambling, though at reduced levels that the rental arrangement could accommodate. Mom had returned to her pattern of enabling his behavior while avoiding confrontation about the underlying problems. Jake had moved back in permanently, treating the house like a free resource rather than a privilege that someone else was providing. None of them had shown curiosity about their mysterious benefactor or made efforts to express gratitude for the extraordinary generosity they'd received. In their minds, the rescue had been something owed to them rather than a gift that deserved acknowledgement. This reaction had confirmed Ashley's prediction about the test my anonymous help represented. My family's character hadn't been improved by receiving assistance. Instead, they'd simply incorporated their rescue into their existing narrative of entitlement and superiority. Now, as I sat in my apartment on Christmas morning listening to Mrs. Peterson describe Jake's victory celebration, I understood that the test period was coming to an end. My family had been given 14 months to demonstrate growth, gratitude, or at least basic curiosity about their circumstances, and they'd failed completely. The time for anonymous generosity was ending, and the time for honest confrontation was about to begin. Whether they could handle that reality would determine everything about our future relationship and their continued residence in the house I'd purchased to save them. Christmas morning brought fresh snow, and the decision that would change everything. I'd spent the night listening to Ashley's gentle counsel about family boundaries and self-respect, finally reaching the conclusion that my anonymous generosity had become another form of enabling their bad behavior. You can't force people to appreciate what they won't acknowledge, she'd reminded me over breakfast. And you shouldn't have to hide your success to avoid their resentment. The drive back to my childhood home felt different this time, weighted with the knowledge that this conversation would either repair our relationship forever or end it permanently. The Christmas decorations that had charmed neighborhood visitors for decades now seemed like facade covering a family that had forgotten how to value each other. I pulled into the driveway at 10:30, noting that Jake's truck was parked in the spot that had been mine throughout high school. The symbolism wasn't lost on me as I walked past the mailbox that still bore the Harrison name, though I now held the deed to everything it represented. The front door opened before I could knock, revealing Mom in her holiday apron with flour smudges on her hands and worry lines deepening around her eyes. Behind her, the sounds of celebration continued as Jake and Crystal enjoyed their Christmas morning in the bedroom that had once been my sanctuary. "Sam, honey, I didn't expect you back so soon," Mom began, her voice carrying the nervous energy that appeared whenever family conflict threatened to escalate. "Your dad's still pretty upset about last night, and Jake's in a good mood for once. Maybe we could talk later when everyone's calmed down?" The smell of Christmas breakfast wafted past her into the cold air, carrying memories of better times when holidays had meant family unity instead of carefully managed tensions. Ham and eggs, hash browns, and Mom's famous cinnamon rolls that Jake had always claimed as his favorite, though I'd helped her perfect the recipe during countless childhood mornings. "I'm just here to get my things," I replied calmly, stepping past her into the warmth of the house I'd purchased 14 months earlier to save them from homelessness. Dad promised to bag everything up, and I'd rather not leave it until after the holidays. The living room showed evidence of their Christmas celebration, with torn wrapping paper scattered around the tree and expensive gifts displayed prominently on the coffee table. Jake's new tablet, Crystal's jewelry, Mom's cashmere sweater, and Dad's leather jacket represented several $1,000s worth of purchases that their official income couldn't possibly support. "Where did all this come from?" I asked, gesturing at the lavish display, while calculating the approximate cost of items that exceeded Dad's monthly factory wages. Mom's face flushed slightly as she followed my gaze to the evidence of their improved circumstances. "Well, things have been better since we got the new rental arrangement," she explained weakly. "The payments are so reasonable that your dad's been able to save money for special occasions." The explanation would have been believable if I hadn't known the true state of their finances. Even with the incredibly generous lease terms I'd structured, Dad's gambling habits, and Jake's unemployment meant their disposable income should have been minimal. The expensive gifts suggested either hidden income sources or dangerous new debt accumulation. Jake appeared at the top of the stairs, wearing silk pajamas that probably cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. His satisfaction with last night's confrontation was evident in his relaxed posture and broad smile as he descended toward the living room. Well, look who came crawling back, he announced to anyone within earshot. I guess Christmas just isn't the same without family drama, right, Sam? Crystal emerged behind him, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the early hour, and her makeup applied with professional precision. Her red silk robe matched Jake's pajamas in a coordinated display that suggested they'd planned this appearance for maximum effect on whoever might witness their domestic bliss. Jake, please. Mom attempted to intervene, but her voice lacked any real authority to control the situation that was clearly about to escalate beyond her management capabilities. No, Mom, it's fine, Jake continued, settling into Dad's recliner with the confidence of someone who believed he controlled the situation completely. Sam needs to understand how things work around here now that we've got stability and security. The irony of his words hit me like a physical blow, though I managed to maintain my calm exterior. Jake was lecturing me about stability while living in the house I'd purchased, enjoying security I'd provided, and dismissing the brother who'd saved his family from losing everything they owned. Dad appeared from the kitchen carrying a beer that suggested his Christmas morning routine had already progressed beyond coffee and breakfast. His face showed the wear of someone who'd been drinking regularly for months, with broken blood vessels around his nose and the slightly unfocused gaze that indicated this wasn't his first beer of the day. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, though his words were slightly slurred in a way that made Mom's shoulders tense with familiar embarrassment. "I thought we settled this last night." "Just getting my belongings," I repeated, maintaining the same calm tone despite the growing tension that filled the room like smoke from a hidden fire. "Then I'll be out of your way permanently." "Good," Dad replied, settling heavily onto the couch next to Jake in a display of unified male authority. "Maybe now we can get back to being a normal family without all the negativity you bring to every gathering." The accusation stung because it contained a kernel of truth wrapped in complete misunderstanding. My presence did create tension, but only because it reminded them of their own failures and limitations. I represented the success they'd dismissed, and the independence they'd never encouraged, making my achievements feel like criticisms of their choices. Crystal had been watching this exchange with calculating eyes, clearly evaluating how the family dynamics might affect her own position in their hierarchy. When she spoke, her voice carried the honeyed tone that indicated manipulation disguised as concern. "I think it's really sad that families can't get along during the holidays," she observed, directing her comment toward me while maintaining sympathetic eye contact. "Especially when everyone's doing so well now, and there's really no reason for old resentments to continue causing problems." Her words revealed how completely Jake had shared their family history with her, though clearly from his own perspective that cast him as the reasonable family member dealing with his difficult older brother. She had no understanding of the true dynamics or the sacrifices that had preserved her current comfort. "You're right," I agreed, surprising everyone with my ready acceptance of her premise. "There really is no reason for resentments to continue, especially when the truth about everyone's circumstances is so clear." Something in my tone made Mom stop bustling around the kitchen and focus completely on our conversation. She'd developed sensitive radar for emotional undercurrents that might explode into family warfare, and she was detecting something dangerous in the way this exchange was developing. Jake, however, remained oblivious to the warning signs as he continued his victory lap from the night before. "Exactly. We've got our lives together now, and we don't need anyone bringing down the positive energy we've worked so hard to build." The phrase "worked so hard" was particularly rich, coming from someone who hadn't held steady employment in over a year, but I let it pass without comment, while observing how comfortable he'd become in his position as family spokesperson and decision-maker. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of car doors slamming in the driveway, followed by heavy footsteps on the front porch. The doorbell rang twice in the official pattern that suggested either package delivery or some form of authority seeking attention. "Are we expecting anyone?" Mom asked, looking around the room for answers while drying her hands on the kitchen towel she'd been clutching throughout this conversation. "I'll get it," Jake volunteered, rising from the recliner with the confidence of someone who assumed any Christmas morning visitors would be bringing good news or holiday greetings from neighbors who appreciated the family's stability and success. He opened the front door to reveal two police officers standing on the porch, their uniforms and official demeanor immediately changing the atmosphere in the room from tense family discussion to something far more serious and potentially life-altering. "Are you Daniel Harrison?" the older officer asked, consulting a clipboard while snowflakes accumulated on his uniform. "That's my dad," Jake replied, his voice losing some of its earlier confidence as he processed the implications of law enforcement arriving during their holiday celebration. "We need to speak with him about some financial irregularities that have come to our attention," the officer continued. "Is he available?" The words "financial irregularities" hit the room like a bomb blast, immediately silencing all conversation, while everyone processed what this unexpected development might mean for their comfortable assumptions about their current security and future plans. Dad's face had gone completely white, and his beard trembled slightly in his hands, as he realized that his past decisions were finally catching up with him in the most public and humiliating way possible. The confident patriarch who'd expelled me last night had been replaced by someone who looked genuinely frightened of what was about to unfold. Detective Rodriguez stepped into our living room with the measured authority of someone accustomed to delivering bad news during family gatherings. His partner, Officer Thompson, remained near the doorway while consulting official paperwork that made Dad's hands shake visibly as he struggled to maintain his composure. "Mr. Daniel Harrison," Detective Rodriguez began, his voice carrying the professional tone that preceded life-changing announcements. "We have a warrant to search these premises for evidence related to charges of embezzlement and financial fraud filed by Morrison Manufacturing Company." The words hit the room like grenades, exploding the comfortable holiday atmosphere that had existed moments earlier. Mom dropped her kitchen towel and reached for the nearest chair, her face draining of color as she processed the implications of law enforcement investigating her husband for serious crimes. "Embezzlement?" she whispered, the word barely audible as she stared at Dad with growing horror. "What are they talking about, Dan?" Dad's attempt to maintain his authority crumbled completely as he realized that his secret financial crimes had finally been discovered by his employer. The gambling debts that had driven him to forge documents and steal company funds were about to be exposed to his family and neighbors simultaneously. "There's been some kind of mistake," he began weakly, but Detective Rodriguez interrupted with details that made denial impossible. Morrison Manufacturing discovered $12,000 in missing funds during their annual audit last month, the detective explained while producing documentation that supported every accusation. Forged expense reports, fraudulent vendor payments, and altered time cards, all bearing your signature and employee identification number. Crystal had backed away from Jake toward the stairs, her survival instincts recognizing that her comfortable future was disintegrating in real time. The family stability she'd been counting on was built on criminal activity that could result in prison sentences and complete financial ruin. $12,000? Mom repeated, her voice rising with each word as she understood that Dad's problems were far worse than anything she'd imagined. "Where did the money go, Dan? What did you spend it on?" The answer was obvious to everyone who'd observed Dad's behavior over the past year, though no one wanted to acknowledge the gambling addiction that had driven him to steal from his employer. His daily trips to buy lottery tickets and long hours spent on betting websites had been warning signs that everyone had chosen to ignore. Jake's confidence had evaporated as he realized that his family's security was built on illegal activity that was about to result in criminal prosecution. The brother he'd mocked for leaving home was about to be proven right about the family's fundamental dysfunction and poor decision-making. "We need to verify your current housing situation for the bail determination," Officer Thompson explained while consulting his paperwork. "Are you the homeowner here, or are you renting this property?" "We're renting," Mom replied automatically, still processing the revelation about Dad's crimes while trying to answer the officer's questions accurately. "The mortgage was sold last year to some company, and now we pay rent to whoever bought it." "Do you have a copy of your rental agreement?" Detective Rodriguez asked. "We need to contact the property owner to confirm your housing stability before we can process the bail arrangements." Mom hurried toward the kitchen drawer, where important documents were stored, her hands trembling, as she searched through insurance papers and medical bills to locate the lease agreement that had saved them from foreclosure 14 months earlier. "Here it is," she said, returning with the document that would change everything they thought they understood about their circumstances. "The rental company is called Harrison Holdings, LLC, and they've been wonderful to work with." Officer Thompson examined the paperwork carefully, noting details that would be relevant for Dad's bail conditions, while ensuring they had accurate information about the family's current living situation and financial obligations. "The contact information lists Samuel Harrison as the primary representative for Harrison Holdings, LLC, he observed, glancing around the room to identify which family member shared that name. "Is he available to verify the rental agreement terms?" The silence that followed was deafening as everyone processed what the officer had just revealed. Jake's mouth fell open in shock, while Crystal backed another step toward the stairs as she realized her assumptions about family wealth and stability had been completely wrong. Mom's eyes found mine across the room, her expression changing from confusion to dawning recognition as she understood what the officer's words meant about our family's true circumstances. The anonymous benefactor who'd saved their house wasn't some distant relative or mysterious corporation. "That's me," I said quietly, finally ending the charade that had protected their pride while hiding my generosity for over a year. "I'm the one who bought the house when you were about to lose it to foreclosure." Dad's beer can hit the floor with a metallic clatter, spreading liquid across the carpet that Mom had vacuumed specially for Christmas morning. His face cycled through disbelief, humiliation, and rage as he processed the complete reversal of power dynamics he thought he understood. "That's impossible," Jake stammered, his worldview crashing around him as he realized his assumptions about success and failure had been completely backward. "You're just a computer repair guy. You couldn't afford this house." "Computer software development," I corrected gently. "My company was acquired for enough money to buy this house, and several others like it, if I'd chosen to invest that way." Officer Thompson was consulting his notes while observing the family drama unfolding before him, clearly accustomed to domestic situations that became complicated when financial realities were exposed during criminal investigations. "So you own this property, Mr. Samuel Harrison?" he confirmed, making notes that would be relevant for processing Dad's arrest and determining whether his housing situation provided sufficient stability for bail consideration. "Yes. I purchased it in November of last year when they received a foreclosure notice," I replied, watching my family absorb the implications of everything they'd just learned about their circumstances and my role in preserving their security. Crystal was now halfway up the stairs, her face calculating rapidly as she realized that her comfortable future with Jake depended entirely on the generosity of the brother they'd spent years treating as a failure and disappointment. Mom sank into her chair completely, overwhelmed by the convergence of revelations about Dad's criminal behavior and my secret intervention to save their home. The son she'd allowed Dad to mistreat was also the person who'd prevented her family from becoming homeless. "You saved us," she whispered, tears beginning to flow as she understood that my absence from family gatherings hadn't been about rejecting them, but about protecting myself from their continued disrespect while still ensuring their welfare. Jake's humiliation was complete as he realized that his victory celebration had been performed while living in the house I owned, sleeping in the bedroom I'd paid to preserve, and enjoying security that existed entirely because of my financial intervention. Detective Rodriguez cleared his throat diplomatically, reminding everyone that they were conducting a criminal investigation rather than hosting a family therapy session. "Mr. Send, "Daniel Harrison, you need to come with us for questioning about the embezzlement charges." Dad rose unsteadily from the couch, his authority completely demolished by the twin revelations of his criminal activity and his dependence on the son he'd expelled from the family just 12 hours earlier. The patriarch who'd demanded respect through intimidation was now revealed as both a criminal and a person whose survival depended entirely on someone else's generosity. "Sam," he began, but I raised my hand to stop whatever plea or excuse he was preparing to offer. "We'll discuss this later," I said calmly. "Right now, you need to deal with the legal consequences of your choices." As the police escorted Dad toward their patrol car, the family he'd controlled through fear and manipulation was left to contemplate their complete dependence on the son they'd never appreciated or supported. Their comfortable assumptions about power, success, and family hierarchy had been shattered in the span of 10 minutes. The house that bore their name was mine. The security they'd taken for granted was my gift. The comfortable future they'd planned was entirely subject to my continued generosity or withdrawal of support. Everything had changed, and they were just beginning to understand how completely their world had been turned upside down by the truth they'd been living unknowingly for over a year. The 48 hours following Dad's arrest created a vacuum in the Harrison family hierarchy that exposed everyone's true character when the comfortable illusions were stripped away. With Dad facing potential prison time and their financial security revealed to depend entirely on my generosity, each family member responded in ways that confirmed everything I'd suspected about their priorities and values. Jake's reaction was the most predictable and the most revealing. Within 24 hours of learning that I owned the house, he'd contacted my business competitors, trying to spread malicious rumors about my character and professional integrity. His plan, apparently, was to damage my reputation enough that I'd lose clients and be forced to rely on family support, thereby restoring the power dynamic he preferred. "I told Morrison Tech that you're vindictive and manipulative," he'd confessed during a heated phone call where he actually seemed proud of his sabotage attempt. "People should know what kind of person they're really dealing with when they hire you." The irony of Jake calling me manipulative while attempting to destroy my livelihood wasn't lost on me, though his complete lack of self-awareness made the conversation more sad than infuriating. He'd learned of my success and generosity simultaneously, yet his first instinct had been to attack rather than reconsider his treatment of me. His sabotage attempt had backfired spectacularly in ways he couldn't have anticipated. Marcus Williams, my longtime mentor, had fielded several calls from business associates who'd heard Jake's accusations and wanted to verify their accuracy. Instead of damaging my reputation, Jake's lies had prompted an outpouring of support from people who'd witnessed my character and work ethic firsthand. That boy just confirmed what everyone already knew about the Harrison family dynamics. Marcus had told me during lunch the day after Christmas. "He's got his priorities so backward that he'd rather tear you down than admit he was wrong about your worth." Morrison Tech had actually laughed when Jake approached them with his accusations, having worked with me on several successful projects that had exceeded their expectations for quality and professionalism. Their response had been to call my office directly to express support and inquire about additional collaboration opportunities. The unintended consequence of Jake's sabotage was that several potential employers who'd been considering him for positions immediately withdrew their offers. His association with trying to damage a respected local businessman's reputation had marked him as someone with questionable judgment and poor character. Crystal's response had been equally revealing, though more focused on immediate self-preservation than long-term revenge. Within hours of learning about Dad's arrest and my property ownership, she'd broken up with Jake and moved out of the house, claiming that she needed space to think about her future. Her pregnancy announcement, which had been the centerpiece of their Christmas celebration, had been revealed as complete fabrication designed to pressure Jake into commitment and secure her position in what she'd assumed was a financially stable family situation. The medical appointments she'd scheduled were canceled, and the baby preparations she'd demanded were abandoned. "I can't be with someone whose family has this much drama and instability," she'd explained to Jake while packing her belongings. apparently forgetting that the stability she was abandoning had been provided entirely by the brother she'd encouraged him to mistreat. Her departure had devastated Jake in ways that went beyond romantic disappointment. Crystal had been the audience for his superiority complex, the person who'd validated his sense of being the successful family member while I struggled with computer stuff that wasn't real work. Without her admiration, his entire self-image collapsed. Mom's reaction had been the most complex and the most hopeful. After the initial shock of Dad's arrest and my revelation, she'd spent long hours sitting in the kitchen, where we'd once shared morning conversations before school, clearly wrestling with years of guilt about enabling Dad's treatment of me. "I should have stood up for you," she'd admitted during a tearful phone conversation 2 days after Christmas. "I knew he was wrong about you, but I was too scared of his anger to say anything. I chose the easy path and let you suffer for it." Her apology felt genuine in ways that Dad's desperate pleas from jail couldn't match. Mom had been influenced by Dad's control and manipulation, but she'd never actively participated in dismissing my achievements or questioning my worth. Her silence had been cowardly rather than malicious. "I don't expect forgiveness," she'd continued, "but I want you to know that I'm proud of what you've accomplished and ashamed of how we treated the person who saved our home. You deserved so much better from the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally." The conversation had opened a possibility for rebuilding our relationship that hadn't existed, while Dad's dominance made honest communication impossible. With him facing prison time, Mom would need to develop independence and make her own choices about family relationships. Ashley had been my anchor throughout this emotional hurricane, helping me process the complex feelings that arose from finally being acknowledged by people who'd dismissed me for years. Her perspective kept me focused on my own well-being, rather than getting lost in attempts to fix relationships that might not be repairable. "Your mom seems genuinely remorseful," she'd observed, "but Jake and your dad are still trying to control the situation instead of taking responsibility for their actions. Don't confuse desperation with actual change." Her wisdom proved accurate when Dad called from jail demanding that I bail him out and provide legal representation, apparently believing that his financial dependence on me created obligations I was required to fulfill, regardless of his behavior toward me. "You're my son, and you have a responsibility to help family when they're in trouble," he'd argued, completely missing the irony that he'd expelled me from the family just days earlier when he'd thought he held all the power in our relationship. The decision about their housing situation had been building for weeks before the Christmas confrontation, but Jake's sabotage attempt and Dad's continued demands had finally forced me to act. I couldn't continue providing for people who would actively try to harm me when they felt threatened by my success. Timothy Rodriguez had prepared the eviction paperwork months earlier, anticipating that this confrontation was inevitable, given my family's character and their treatment of my generosity. The legal 30-day notice was ready to file whenever I decided that anonymous support was enabling rather than helping their personal growth. "You have grounds for immediate eviction based on the criminal activity and the hostile environment they've created," Timothy had explained. "But you also have the option to give them time to find alternative housing, if you prefer a less dramatic conclusion." The 30-day notice represented a middle path that gave them time to adjust while making clear that my support was ending. They would need to find housing they could afford with Dad facing unemployment and potential incarceration, while Jake would finally be forced to find steady employment instead of depending on family resources. Mom's genuine remorse had earned her the possibility of maintaining limited contact after she'd established independence and demonstrated real change in her treatment of me. Jake and Dad had forfeited any consideration by choosing attack and manipulation over accountability and growth. Mrs. Peterson had offered to deliver the eviction notice, having witnessed the family dynamics for 30 years and understanding that my decision was both justified and necessary for my own emotional health. Her support from the community helped me feel confident that reasonable people would understand why I couldn't continue enabling people who'd tried to destroy my reputation. The notice would arrive on New Year's Eve, giving them exactly 30 days to find new housing while starting the new year, with a clear understanding that actions have consequences, even when those consequences come from someone they'd underestimated completely. Their comfortable assumptions about power and control were about to collide with reality in ways that would either force genuine growth or confirm that some people are incapable of learning from their mistakes. Either way, my responsibility for their choices was finally ending. New Year's Eve arrived with crystalline snow and the kind of clarity that comes from making decisions aligned with personal integrity rather than family obligation. Mrs. Peterson had volunteered to deliver the eviction notice, understanding that 30 years of observing our family dynamics gave her unique insight into why this confrontation had become inevitable. They made their bed when they chose pride over love, she'd told me while accepting the official paperwork. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for people is let them face the consequences of their choices. The 30-day notice had been carefully worded to provide maximum time for adjustment, while making clear that their residence in my property was ending permanently. Timothy Rodriguez had structured the document to offer dignified transition assistance while protecting me from any legal challenges they might attempt. Dad's reaction from jail had been characteristically focused on his own convenience, rather than acknowledging the justice of facing consequences for his treatment of me. His collect calls demanded that I reconsider the eviction while offering no apology for years of disrespect or recognition of the generosity he'd unknowingly received. "You can't put your own mother on the street," he'd argued during his third call that week, apparently believing that guilt about Mom's situation would override my commitment to ending the enabling relationship that had allowed his abuse to continue unchallenged. Jake's response had been more desperate and more revealing. With Crystal gone, and his employment prospects damaged by his own sabotage attempts, he'd finally begun to understand how completely his comfortable life had depended on resources he'd never earned or appreciated. "I was wrong about everything," he'd admitted during a tearful phone call, where desperation had temporarily replaced his usual arrogance. "I didn't understand what you'd accomplished or how much you'd done for us. Please give me another chance to prove I can change." The plea might have been more moving if it hadn't been accompanied by continued attempts to negotiate favorable terms, rather than simply accepting responsibility for the situation he'd created. Jake still believed that relationships were transactions that could be managed through the right combination of words and promises. Mom's response had been different enough to offer hope for eventual reconciliation built on genuine respect rather than family obligation. Her acknowledgement of enabling Dad's behavior and her commitment to therapy showed understanding that change required action rather than just apology. "I'm moving to an apartment downtown where I can walk to work and therapy appointments," she'd explained during our final conversation before the eviction deadline. "I need to learn how to be independent and make my own decisions instead of just avoiding conflict." The trial proceedings for Dad's embezzlement charges had moved quickly through the legal system, with Morrison Manufacturing's thorough documentation making denial impossible. His guilty plea had resulted in an 18-month sentence in minimum security prison, along with restitution requirements that would affect his finances for years. Jake's complete social and professional isolation had forced him to accept a minimum wage position stocking shelves at the grocery store, where he'd once felt superior to the employees during his failed entrepreneurial phases. The humbling experience was either teaching him about honest work or confirming his unsuitability for personal growth. Crystal's departure and the revelation about her fake pregnancy had become neighborhood gossip that followed Jake wherever he went, serving as a constant reminder that manipulation and dishonesty eventually exposed themselves. Her attempt to return when she learned about the eviction had been firmly rejected. The sale of the family house had been completed 6 weeks after they'd moved out, providing capital that allowed me to expand my business and hire additional employees who appreciated stable, respectful working relationships. The proceeds also funded a scholarship program for students from difficult family backgrounds. Ashley and I had used the resolution of my family situation as an opportunity to plan our own future together, free from the emotional drain of managing relationships with people who couldn't appreciate our efforts or respect our boundaries. Our engagement announcement had been celebrated by chosen family, who'd supported us throughout the challenging process. Marcus Williams had introduced me to other business leaders who'd overcome difficult family backgrounds to build successful enterprises, creating a network of relationships based on mutual respect and shared values rather than genetic connection or social obligation. The scholarship fund I'd established was generating applications from students whose stories reminded me of my own journey toward independence and self-reliance. Supporting their education felt more meaningful than subsidizing adults who refused to take responsibility for their own choices and behavior. Mom's progress toward independence had been steady and encouraging, with regular therapy sessions helping her understand how her enabling behavior had contributed to family dysfunction. Her willingness to examine her own mistakes offered hope that our relationship could eventually be rebuilt on healthier foundations. "I'm learning that love doesn't mean accepting bad behavior," she'd shared during one of our monthly coffee meetings. "I should have protected you from your father's anger instead of teaching you to accept disrespect as normal family dynamics." Her apartment was small but comfortable, decorated with photos that included me for the first time in years rather than featuring only Jake's achievements and milestones. The change represented recognition that family success should be measured by character and contribution rather than compliance with parental expectations. Jake's journey toward accountability had been slower and less certain, though his circumstances had forced him to confront realities he'd avoided throughout his comfortable life as the family's preferred child. His requests for contact were gradually becoming less demanding and more focused on understanding rather than negotiating. Dad's letters from prison continued to focus on his own hardships rather than acknowledging the pain his behavior had caused others, confirming that incarceration alone wouldn't produce the personal growth necessary for relationship repair. His release would eventually test whether consequences had taught him anything about respect and gratitude. The business expansion funded by the house sale had allowed me to hire 3 additional employees, creating opportunities for people who shared my values about hard work and mutual respect. Building a workplace culture based on appreciation and support felt like positive use of resources that had once been tied to family dysfunction. Community response to my story had been overwhelmingly supportive, with neighbors and business associates expressing respect for the difficult decisions required to prioritize self-respect over family obligation. Their validation helped confirm that healthy relationships require mutual effort rather than unilateral sacrifice. 2 years after the Christmas confrontation that exposed everything, I received a letter from Jake that differed significantly from his earlier communications. Instead of demands or negotiations, it contained evidence of sustained change and genuine understanding of his past behavior. "I've been working the same job for 14 months now," he'd written, "and I finally understand what you meant about earning what you receive instead of expecting it as a gift. I also understand why you couldn't keep supporting people who treated your generosity as weakness rather than strength." The letter included documentation of his community service work with families facing foreclosure, showing that he'd chosen to help others experiencing the crisis our family had faced, rather than simply focusing on his own recovery. His commitment to consistent action over dramatic gestures indicated possible genuine growth. "I don't expect forgiveness or renewed relationship," his letter continued, "but I wanted you to know that your decision to stop enabling our bad behavior was the wake-up call I needed to become someone worthy of respect, rather than someone who demands it without earning it." Standing in the home Ashley and I had purchased together, surrounded by the life we'd built through mutual support and shared values, I considered Jake's request for the possibility of eventual reconciliation based on demonstrated change rather than family obligation. The decision would require careful consideration and Ashley's input, but for the first time in years, it seemed possible that family relationships could be rebuilt on foundations of genuine respect, rather than genetic connection or social expectation. The greatest lesson from this entire experience had been understanding that love without respect is enabling, and that the most generous thing you can sometimes do for people is allow them to face the consequences of their choices. True family members fight to keep you, not push you away, and they celebrate your success rather than trying to diminish it. Success means nothing if you sacrifice your dignity to people who can't appreciate your worth, but it means everything when shared with people who understand that relationships require mutual effort, gratitude, and respect, rather than one-sided sacrifice and unconditional tolerance. Sometimes the family you choose proves more loyal than the family you're born into, and sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the opportunity to learn that their actions have consequences that can't be negotiated away through manipulation or desperate promises. As I finished reading Jake's letter, while snow fell outside our living room windows, I realized that this story's true ending wasn't about revenge or justice, but about learning that self-respect and healthy boundaries are the foundation for all meaningful relationships, including the ones we rebuild after they've been broken by people who finally understand what they lost. The question isn't whether family members deserve forgiveness, but whether they've demonstrated the growth necessary to handle the responsibility that forgiveness represents. Time would tell whether Jake's changes were permanent enough to risk rebuilding trust, but either way, my life was now built on respect rather than obligation. Think about the relationships in your own life. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and self-respect? How do you balance supporting people you love with avoiding enabling their destructive behavior? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe for more real-life stories about family dynamics and personal growth. Share this with someone who might need to hear that their worth isn't determined by other people's ability to appreciate their value. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember that you deserve relationships that build you up rather than tear you down. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to accept less than you deserve, even from family members who should know better.